Greetings and welcome to our latest edition, our first Spotlight at Northern of the 2025-2026 academic year. My name is John Schaff. I'm professor of political science at Northern State University. I'm joined, as I always am, by the merry men, Professor Kenneth Blanchard, right, emeritus of political science, and the illustrious Stephen Usitalo, who I like to call El Jefe, because he's my boss.
Of the ever-shrinking history and social sciences department.
Yes. That doesn't mean that we're all getting shorter, though that might be true too. But he is our department chair, so I owe him fealty. So anyhow, I have a list of stuff for us to talk about, and maybe we'll talk about some of it, and we'll see what happens. But one of the things we wanted to talk about, our intrepid colleague here, Professor Blanchard, had some thoughts about Donald J. Trump as tragic hero. So maybe we ought to start that discussion with, what the heck do you mean that Donald J. Trump is a tragic hero?
It's easy. I mean, he's a hero that's tragic. Next question.
All right, so moving on to crime.
I was thinking, there's a quote, it comes out of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. It goes something like this. Around the hero, everything becomes a tragedy. Around the satyr, everything becomes a satire. Around God, everything becomes what? Perhaps a world. Now, like most things that Nietzsche wrote, it was less philosophical and more poetic. But it is pretty good poetry in the sense that it gives you an idea. What does God mean? Something that organizes a coherent world around it. Your God could then be some supernatural being, or the rules of logic, or lots of other things, right? At least making no distinctions between real and unreal beings. Around a hero, everything becomes a tragedy. Bearing in mind and calling Trump a hero here, I'm not necessarily complimenting him, because Greek heroes, tragedies generally didn't end well. They were tragic. And they tend to go badly, but what you do get is the hero moves the action. Everybody else goes into orbit around the hero. Their motives, their behaviors are now all about this guy. And I think you can make that argument right now more than anything else, not just Capitol Hill, but the mainstream media. Trump is the center of everything right now. They're all behaving the way, you could almost predict their behavior by what Trump does next. That's a big thing. Whether it's good or bad, of course, obviously depends on what you think of Trump and his policies.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if he's Odysseus, Achilles, or I don't know who else we got out of the Iliad who might. Or you don't want to be Hector.
It's hard to imagine Trump throwing a spear and nailing someone a half a mile away or something like he does in the movie Troy. But
Achilles does, not Trump. Trump, I don't believe, was in the movie.
Well, that's
Troy.
It's hard to imagine.
I think you're
Trump.
confusing Troy with Home Alone 2. So.
It's hard to imagine Trump doing what Achilles does.
Yeah.
I mean, there has clearly been a transformation, perhaps temporary, of the executive branch under Trump. And his ability to simply do things that up until now people said, you can't do that. And he goes, well, you can.
Well, but I bring up the Odysseus and Achilles. I don't want to get this into a battle of ancient stories, but I mean, you mentioned, to say someone in a Greek tragedy is a hero, as you say, the word hero means something different than what we normally think of in hero, like Sully Sullenberger was a hero, right? Something like that. It's not necessarily a positive thing.
Yes.
Right? And so, that's why I bring up Achilles isn't really an admirable character. In my view, the most admirable character in the Iliad is Hector.
Whom Achilles kills. So
whom Achilles kills and then profanes in dragging his body around. Or like Odysseus, whether it's he's not a main character, the main character in the Iliad, but within the Odyssey is, I think, mostly admirable. You've got various figures. Whether I'm thinking of something like Antigone. I'm just thinking of plays I know very well. Antigone I know very well, right? Creon isn't really admirable, Antigone sort of is, though she's annoying too.
Right, but she's a classic example of a hero who brings about the destruction of everything she cares about by her behavior, which is often the case. Yeah, I tried to specify that the hero is it's not necessarily a good thing to have a hero. But it's an important thing, and you might want to recognize it when you're seeing it. Heroes in classical times often come to bad ends. Well, Othello is a pretty good example of a tragic hero in that sense in Shakespeare. But it just seems to me that Trump is so more impactful. I mean, his personality is so more powerful than presidents tend to be. And his ability to just completely change the rules.
But the only thing I would say that part of it, and I have, my views on Trump are still being a work in progress. They really are. I'm completely disinterested in his personality whatsoever. But let's just look at his policies. I would have said actually a couple of months ago I was sort of impressed with some of the foreign policy moves to a degree. But in the Ukraine case, nothing was accomplished at all, except he invited a war criminal onto U.S. territory and gave him a red carpet. So the Ukraine thing, as the latest reports today from Robert Kagan's group are that if Russia proceeds as it does, it'll take them 4.5 years to seize the Donetsk. Every military report. So Russia's slowly winning the war, but at the point where it's a war of attrition. So nothing was accomplished in Ukraine and Russia. I think actually Putin insulted Trump. He demeaned him at the summit. An American president who is the dominant figure in the world was treated as somebody who Putin is teaching about world policy at that summit. And I thought, I respected Trump in the past that he could push back. I'm surprised he didn't push back at the summit at all against Trump. Then we have Iran. And originally I was, I'm not a fan of the horrific regime in Iran. But now it seems that the destruction of these nuclear facilities aren't nearly as extensive as we were told. And Iran will probably bounce back to be a threat. So if Iran is a threat in a year, so nothing was accomplished in Iran except a handful of generals and others were
except a year or later that it takes them to get a nuclear
but they
weapon.
promised a permanent solution. That was the permanent solution that they offered. And then we have Gaza. Gaza here, there's no end-to-sight in Gaza whatsoever. I mean, so we have those three major foreign policy crises. Nothing's been accomplished. I was expecting Greenland to be part of the United States. I was promised Greenland a year ago. They're slipping out of our grasp.
Did you have your tickets purchased?
They're slipping out of our grasp. And how about the Panama Canal? Where the hell is that?
Stephen is looking forward to going to Panama Canal and Greenland without having to use his passport.
But I'm not even criticizing. I think I appreciate the fact that Trump is getting dialogue going with the Russians. I was worried whether it's actually dialogue, because Putin didn't yield on a single issue. There's really no concessions that he made. I was disappointed because I thought Trump would push back because he had weapons to push back with.
Yeah, well, I think I would disagree with you on a number of counts. For one thing, I'm not sure that there's any peaceful solution to Russia and Ukraine. What other solutions there might be is a difficult question.
Yeah.
But I think despite all these claims that Trump is selling NATO down the road, NATO is more unified now than it's been in a long time.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
And Trump has brought them, again, an example of my hero thesis. They have come into orbit around him. He is indisputably the leader of the Atlantic Alliance. And if, NATO decides that they really want to save Ukraine, they can do it. It would be risky. But you could give the Ukrainians the weapons that they need to neutralize Russia's advantage. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know.
See, that was Biden's great failure, I think, in Ukraine. I'm not even sure it's his failure, but his administration's failure. because I'm not
It's the
sure
same
how
thing.
I'm not sure how involved he was in decision making.
Less.
Less.
Yeah, but
what
that's
I'm
not
gonna
the,
say. Less.
we
Yeah,
judge, we judge the
we
administration.
do. But I'm saying that he gave Ukraine enough support to keep them afloat, but not
Yeah.
enough to actually defeat Russia. So the killing just went on for 3 years.
Which is what we've done in
Many
the
other conflicts,
Which
yeah.
we've done in the
Yeah.
Middle East for
Yeah.
my entire lifetime.
Yeah,
is
it's true.
give the Palestinians enough so they don't have to go to work.
Yeah.
They can spend all their time plotting evil, and then from time to time you get it. But to take your three issues again, I thought Iran was a masterful stroke. For one thing, I mean, he convinced the Iranians it wasn't coming, and then it did. In destroying that, I just don't believe they can rebuild.
But their director of
year.
national intelligence said that there were no facilities coming close. She said, on
And the
record, she
fact
said
that
there's no intelligence information
You're
to
talking,
prove.
you're talking
Tulsi
about the
Gabbard,
director of
yeah.
Iranian intelligence.
No, American, Tulsi Gabbard, testified before Congress several months ago, many times, that Iran is not close to building a nuclear weapon. They with at least 3 years. That's why they shut her down so much during the attacks, because they were. So if the intelligence estimates, the real U.S. intelligence estimates, are that Iran really wasn't close to building it. I don't know if they were or not. I don't think anybody knows at this point. So
Well,
they
they're
bombed
not-
a facility that may or may not be several years away from it.
You seem to have argued in a few minutes that they're way closer than anybody thinks, and they're going to be back on
We don't
track
know,
any
Ken.
minute.
We just the problem is
Well,
we don't
okay,
know.
but you can't argue that we didn't do any good with a bomb, because they're going to get a bomb again in 2 years, and then turn around and tell me they weren't even close to begin with.
You know what a lot of people think is what the U.S. succeeded in doing? It's a horrible regime. They brutalized the population. What they've done is they've strengthened the regime, the hold in Iran.
I seriously doubt that.
Because they're basically utilizing the U.S. as they always do, as the great Satan.
Yeah, but
that's-
they had. Go
I
ahead.
disagree with that to this extent, in that we have to. The regime may still be strong, but I don't think it's because of. It would be in
anything the
spite
US
of.
did, yeah.
It might just be working on plenty of inertia.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. But I would think that not just the United States attacks, but then remember the Israeli attacks, where all sorts of people, you might say, a level of the Israeli military was decapitated, maybe literally, was
Yeah.
decapitated. And also there was like a level of leadership that was eliminated. And
And the
I'm
level-
not sure how much it hurts the regime. I'm pretty sure it doesn't help
Doesn't help you, right? You're right.
the regime.
Yeah.
I was just a basic response to the tragic hero. It's an interesting. You should write this.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thesis. But I was going to say, one of the reasons why Trump might appear to be a tragic hero in the sense that you mean it is it doesn't seem like there's any pushback in that he's not faced with any opposition in the way, naturally the place to look in the United States for such a hero would be in the presidency. I'm just thinking like going back, in the era of Ronald Reagan, who was a strong president, there was a Tip O'Neill, or like Margaret Thatcher was an important player on the world stage, or whoever, even Brezhnev, someone like that. I'll skip George H.W. Bush because I don't think he was thought, even though he was a war hero, was not thought of as a hero.
Yeah.
Like a Clinton, eventually there was a Newt Gingrich, right, to push back on him, right, et cetera. And out of Congress, the Democrats have nobody that pushes back. To the extent there is a Democrat pushing, maybe it's Gavin Newsom, and I think he's relatively ineffectual. There's no leader on the international stage who really equals Trump in charisma. Now, it might be, as they say, that someone like Putin or Xi are just playing possum with them. And so it's only apparent that Trump stands astride the world stage. But in actuality, Xi and Putin are moving. I'm now going to mix my metaphors. Are moving chess pieces too. They're just not. They're not being vocal in their opposition or the consideration of I guess my point is, here's a short way of ending a long-winded statement, is there is this sort of vacuum out there. So Trump, now it might be because of his own sort of Machiavellian virtue, but there does happen to be nobody who's really pushing back against him right now. That maybe that changes if, say, Democrats take one or two branches of Congress next year. I don't know, or as you head into a presidential cycle.
Your invocation of Newsom in California is a pretty good example of my thesis. Is what has Newsom got to offer? What is he offering? I'm not Trump, and I can come up with better insults to Trump than you can.
Yeah.
Anything else? What's he going to build a high-speed rail from Santa Monica to the middle of the ocean? There's just not much. Trump's enemies have become almost entirely flat anti-Trump posters. And I see that again and again. And he's very good at getting his enemies to take ridiculous stances. And again, it's because they can, I mean, if he came out in favor of apple pie, the Democrats would announce that it was a horrible white supremacist dessert.
Well, I'm not sure the Democrats even have that. I don't even think like you used to refer to as Trump derangement syndrome. What I hear is a lot of silence. I mean, there's a small minority of people who are obsessed with every aspect of Trump, but I see a lot of people who are just sort of waiting, sitting this out, trying to figure out what's happening. I don't see the extreme anger at Trump that I saw maybe in 2019. In 2000, I mean, Hakeem Jeffries is not an extreme. He's an ineffective leader, but he's not an extremist in terms of some of the rhetoric that he.
That could be true. I could think of a couple reasons why that is true. The main one is that a political problem that Trump has is that he cannot run for re-election.
Yeah.
And so it may be that at least some people have discerned we can't really beat Trump at this game, so the best thing to do is to keep your mouth shut, because as we see, 3 years, he'll be out of office anyway. So why put yourself in the position? Because it does seem like almost everybody, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, who goes mano a mano with Trump, certainly these days, ends up looking ridiculous, precisely because they feel like they've got to be 180 degrees from wherever he is. What does it take to get Democrats, to defend crime, illegal immigration?
They're used to defending illegal immigration. Getting them to say that the highest crime rate of any major civilized capital is okay because it spiked and then it came down a bit. So that's all we need to focus on. Getting the Democrats to say that.
You take the case of Maryland man, right? Which, whatever the legal niceties are of his case, what does it take to get a bunch of Democrats to celebrate a guy who beats up his girlfriend, who human traffics, and is a drug dealer?
Right.
Have the Trump administration go after him, and they'll defend the guy. Which, again, I'm not sure that what the Trump administration has been absolutely legal. When I say I'm not sure, I'm really not sure.
Neither am I.
As I'm not an immigration lawyer. I suspect they're in good legal stead, but I'm not sure of that. What I am sure of is defending this guy is stupid, right? Or at least going to the mat. Like, who was it? Was it Chris Murphy?
Yeah,
who went down to El Salvador and had like margaritas with this guy?
Yeah, that was
it's one thing. What they should be doing is attacking the law instead of putting their arms around this guy and saying this guy is a victim. The guy is a creep.
Yeah.
And we'd all be happier if he were out of the country as long as it's legal.
Or the guy
that's the mistake.
The Wisconsin judge lets go. It helps him escape ICE agents, who was there for a charge of battery. But all you have to do is be an illegal immigrant, and it's okay. The left will forgive you, and suddenly you become a hero who's being mistreated. it's bad politics, whatever you think of the moral issues and how we ought
You know,
to
the
deal
only
with those
problem I
things.
think with Democrats, it's not about sort of illegal immigrants. It's just that the focus on illegal immigration or any type of it has such a nativist hue to it that it's just not part of the DNA. I get it's a losing argument about immigration, but it's part of who the Democratic Party is, and they're not going to go back on that. They're not going to accept the Republican. They're just not.
Well,
And so you have to be like me. Basically, I'm indifferent to immigration. I don't care one way, mainly because I came here when I was 14, so I'm hardly somebody who can oppose other immigration. But that being said, I get that's a losing argument for the Democrats. Another one about crime. You know, you could point out, like people do in Chicago all the time. My friend from DePaul emailed me the other day that he was shot twice that morning, for example, just as a comment. Meaning that if you look at the statistics,
You mean shot at? I hope.
no, he was just kidding about the.
Oh, okay, he was kidding. Okay, all right.
Because he's a sort of a bloated Democrat out of Chicago, right? So
Yep.
he can't conceive of a world
like the governor, yeah,
he can't
but-
conceive of a world with Donald Trump in it.
Yep.
But nonetheless, you know, the stats are there, though. I mean, that crime in Chicago. I mean, they're indisputable. Crime in Chicago has dropped 40% since 2019, except for the COVID blip. But you can't argue that because it's a losing argument. You cannot say that crime is declining because people believe it's increasing. You just have to bury that argument. You just have to, but the Democrats can't. They're going to keep quoting the Pew Center research reports or then the FBI statistics, where violent crime in the U.S. has declined. It is. It's indisputable. But how do you make the argument when people believe it's a dangerous world?
First of all, the term decline raises the question of from what to what and whether the decline continues. I don't have in front of me have it in mind the stats from Chicago. But if you look at the stats from, say, 2013 to 2024 in Washington, D.C., it is a steady climb. And yes, it's declined in the last year, you know, from something like over almost 300 down to
But D.C. is an
200.
anomaly, and even then, let me give you an example. Daryl Kosiak, who used to teach here, lives in, and he told me over and over again, you look at the stats, the worst crime, because he studied in Minneapolis, St. Paul for 50 years of it, it was the 70s and 80s. That's the worst crime in Minneapolis. And it's been on a steady decline for 40 years. People don't like to hear it because they're just convinced that the cities are burning. But the stats are there. It's less violent now over 40 years. Over 40 years.
My friend just died. It would be he was better off a few years ago when he was just dying.
But crime, you can't eliminate crime. You cannot.
Well, I think there are 2 points to be made here. One, the one that Ken just made in an oblique way, is if I weigh 400 pounds and I lose 50 pounds and I'm 350 pounds, I don't say now I can stop dieting and I'm healthy because I'm not as heavy as I used to be, right? Well, you're still overweight and unhealthy, right? Or if I've got a cancer and I'm on chemo and, oh, look, my tumors are down 20%. Now I don't have cancer anymore and I don't need to take chemo. You still have cancer. So even if crime rates are down doesn't mean that they're too high, but you also have to know some of those cities stop reporting to the FBI. So the fact that crime is down is a statistical anomaly. As some people like to say, the lived experience.
There is evidence that the numbers have been goosed in places like Washington, D.C., so we do not know for sure that crime is down.
There are major municipalities that simply stopped reporting to the FBI. And the other thing is that, like, what is the lived experience? You could say, like, in a particular city, oh, look, shoplifting's down. Well, that's because everything's under lock and key now, right? If in places like Chicago or San Francisco and New York, in some cases, like the drugstores have just simply left, right? Or in order to get a toothbrush, I have to get the guy to unlock it. That still means my experience of my city is that my city is pathetic because I can't get a toothbrush without it being behind lock and key. Why? Because if they don't put things behind lock and key, everything's going to get stolen, and the prosecutors have announced that they're not going to prosecute any of these people. And so in other words, shoplifting may be down because either all the stores have left or everything's behind a glass partition, and that still I can see that crime is affecting my way of life, or simply as I say, things don't get reported. You read things of, a guy gets assaulted in D.C. and the cops just sort of laugh at him. Like,
And
don't even bother reporting this because we're never going to catch
No,
the guy.
no,
We're not
John-
even going to bother
John, I
trying.
agree, but and one of the problems with the Democrats is going to be that they're going to quote things like, "Yes, it's all these. The crime is we can't get rid of it." They'll say, which is a losing political argument, but it's true. And then they're going to say that we have to look at root causes because the only real consistent criminal crime policies we've had were in Clinton's mass incarceration in the 1990s. We haven't had a consistent crime policy since in 30 years. Neither
I
through
think
Bush.
that's probably right.
And I'm not sure what the stats are in the 90s, whether crime went down when you had the mass incarceration. Probably some evidence.
It did, absolutely.
You did.
Well,
yeah.
the numbers. I mean, the things that you're talking about. Yeah, when was the worst period in crime? That's very easy to correlate. It's the number of young males between the ages of 16
Yeah.
and 35, and when we have a whole bunch of when that population is increasing, you're going to get more crime. And to some degree, that was what was going on. But there were also other things happening at the same time. Recently, we've seen virtual decriminalization of shoplifting in places like Chicago. And all those folks who were complaining about food deserts because there weren't good stores there are now watching them close down and leave out. But here's the thing. You're right in the sense that no society has ever eliminated crime. But eliminating crime is therefore not the issue. Ameliorating it, reducing it, and the fact of the matter is, it's easy to do that. Some years ago, John and I were in Vancouver, and I stayed an extra day, and the next day I walked to a jazz club, and I walked along a neighborhood, and the street where the sun was brightest, it was a little chilly, was lined with junkies. I mean, a lot of them, the night needles were out. There was a guy lying there with a needle stuck in his scalp because that was the only place he could find that he could get in anymore. And I felt perfectly safe because there were 4 cops on every corner. You put cops into a place and the crime goes away, at least temporarily. Well, it goes other places. But if it has to hide, if it has fewer places where the criminals could get together and congregate, and that's why this initiative by Trump, putting federal troops in D.C., is so interesting because it does seem to have reduced crime dramatically. And so talking about crimes have been coming down is silly when you look at a policy that reduces crime overall by 87%.
If it works, but you yourself said it's over long-term trends. That we don't see stats impossible to for 6 months or even a year. It's a multi-year process. We have to look at stats.
Sure.
Even a small dip, it's not going to make any difference.
But the people who have been running D.C., home rule, their D.C. city government, decade after decade does nothing. Now it might be corrupt enough at this point that no amount of money put in the funnel at one end is going to get to any problem it's meant to solve.
But I'm not sure it's always, the policies I might not agree with, but like the Hennepin County's attorney who's not running for reappointment or re-election, I should say, I can't remember her name. She got a lot of attention the last 4 years. Her decision not to prosecute a lot of crime in Hennepin County is if you look at her 40-year record, it's not because she's corrupt or she's stupid. It's because she has a belief that you shouldn't incarcerate juveniles.
Sure.
I don't agree with that policy. I think it's an incorrect policy, and she clearly does because she's not running for office, right? She's not running for re-election.
Well, she doesn't need a weatherman to tell which way the wind
Yeah,
blows.
but her policies are really, it's nothing about corruption or Democrat. That's what she came of that school where incarceration doesn't affect crime rate. She's probably wrong, but that's just the way it goes.
I agree. The biggest problem is not corruption; it's bad ideas.
Yeah.
And ideas that simply will not let go. The notion of addressing root causes is fine. The Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and the White House for the first couple years of Obama's term. They had a veto-proof majority in the Senate briefly. If they knew how to solve the root causes of crime, that would have been the moment. Instead, they spent all their time on the Affordable Care Act and asked somebody on the street how much different life is after that.
Well, you're not going to get me to defend Obama's first 2 years,
I would
or 4
just
years,
say
or
this,
8 years.
We may be getting close to belaboring the subject. The point would be is that criminals, like most people, respond to incentives.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember from our aforementioned former colleague, Professor Koziak, I remember his job talk. And I remember one of the things he did is he had a slide of somebody's house with like a dog chain and a beware of dog sign.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, how likely is a thief going to be to break into this house? Well, less likely.
Yeah.
Because, right, a dog suggests there's protection here. So that's a response to an incentive. I want to go for the easy mark, and the place with the dog is a less easy mark, right? And so, I mean, Minneapolis is a good example. You talk about the Hennepin County prosecutor who refuses to prosecute juveniles, or at least incarcerate them. And you've had so-called radical DAs who have simply refused to, like, we're not going to prosecute any shoplifting below $500 and stuff like that, which is just then carte blanche to shoplift. The city of Minneapolis is about 200 police officers below what they say they need on their force. And so you don't have the police presence that Ken is talking about. And a simple police presence is a disincentive. It's even a bigger disincentive than a beware of dog sign. What I'm not sure about is Trump's authority to put National Guard in D.C., I think, is unquestionable because it's federal property.
I agree.
When he talks about putting, I think he made the decision today, heavy class day for me Wednesdays, so I've caught snippets. In Chicago, and was it Baltimore?
I didn't hear Baltimore. In Chicago I did hear, but I didn't hear Baltimore.
Like I think he announced he's pulled the trigger. And I saw someone this morning say, well, people say there's no federal law enforcement. What about ATF? What about FBI? What about the marshals? That's to enforce federal law. Virtually all the crimes we're talking about are state and local crimes, and this is sort of constitutional law 101. The police power, which means more than what the police do, it's a term of art, but it means at least what the actual police do, is a state and local responsibility, right? It is their power, and there is no, in that sense, there's no federal police force. The federal government does not enforce, first of all, it does not enforce state and local law, and almost all laws having to do with basic public order are state and local laws. Basic murder, shoplifting, assault, theft, carjackings, these are virtually always, except under limited circumstances, violation of state law. And
but so ostensibly governors, governors can call up the National Guard for, like, for example, Walz or with that George Floyd,
or Pritzker, right?
Pritzker can, but not at a federal. Okay.
But it'd be interesting to see if this is adjudicated. That I don't see what Trump's legal authority is to send.
How about the use of the Army for immigration? Can you say that's defending the borders? Defending the borders.
There you're protecting borders.
Yeah,
I'm not. I don't want to get us a far afield. I'm not sure what you think of this. Although God knows I'm in favor of desegregating Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm not sure how legal it was for President Eisenhower to send the 101st Airborne down there to enforce a federal court order. But the consequences are so good, I'm willing to
overlook that.
Sort of look the other way on that one.
Let me respond to your semi-intelligent discourse. No, because I actually agree with almost everything you said. I think clearly under ordinary readings of constitutional law, Trump's authority to deal with D.C. is clear. His authority to insert troops without a request by the governor of a state, that seems to me very dubious and probably in ordinary circumstances. The caveat here is that what was going on in Little Rock when Eisenhower sent in federal troops, it was a national crisis. There was a fundamental question about the United States, which was can Governor Faubus, I've got a picture of my great uncle sitting next to him in my office. Can Governor Faubus, a snake, by the way, just in case anybody wonders about how I feel about it, can Governor Faubus defy federal authority and the authority of the Supreme Court? In that sense, regardless of how serious the actual threat was, you have clearly a crisis of sorts. And that, I think, it'd be very unlikely for a court to go in and overrule that, even if the court hadn't been
Well, in this case,
on
they
this.
endorsed it,
In
obviously.
this case, they were on their side,
Back
right.
in 1957,
So-
they endorsed
Although you could argue it wasn't really a national crisis; it was a local. I mean, depending on how you
it was a national crisis because the question.
It became one, but in that early on, was it still a crisis?
Oh,
already?
absolutely, because
Yeah.
there's defiance of Brown versus Board of Education
Yeah.
from Virginia. Remember, Brown versus Board of Education, it's not come out of Mississippi, it's the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas.
Right. The question was, whether states could simply ignore federal law and authority, and that was settled
Yeah.
by Eisenhower. So I don't think any reasonable court
good
would
question,
have
Dave.
ruled against him in that case. Now, what about crime in Chicago? It's a judgment call as to how bad. The fact that it's going down doesn't help. It's a judgment call as to how bad it is. Pritzker over the weekend and makes this speech, and 56 people are shot, and something like 13 or 7 or 13 or somewhere like that were killed in violence in the city of Chicago.
Can I ask you, why is Chicago's become sort of a template on this, but crime rates in Houston and Dallas are far higher than they are in Chicago. Why isn't he using in Republican states to send the military? Why is it in Baltimore, D.C., and federal? I mean,
Well, the question would be why
in Chicago? Why not Phoenix, which
Why-
is out of control as well? Why were you picking on Chicago as the example rather than Houston?
I would have to look at the numbers, and
But nobody's going to argue that New Orleans is in a completely chaotic city that should have been federalized decades ago in terms of its chaos. So why not New Orleans?
New Orleans would be a good choice.
But he's
Baton
picking
Rouge,
this easy
the
target
worst-
of Chicago because
the worst city for crime in the country is Memphis, Tennessee.
yeah. But he's not sending troops there. He's sending them to Chicago
Well, he hasn't sent them. To my knowledge, he
to
hasn't
confront
sent them.
Pritzker.
Whether he's
to
going
confront Pritzker, in Chicago,
Yeah, and that.
I mean, I'm not 100% opposed to lowering crime in Chicago. If that works, it works. But let's do it. Let's do it in all the cases that matter.
Well, obviously, there would be two answers to that, assuming your numbers are right, and I'm not sure they are. But let's
New
just take
Orleans
it
is
for-
probably right.
Yeah. But anyway, one is surely there's a level of mendaciousness on Trump's part, is that he's sending them to places that Democrats have control over,
Yeah.
right? There's a Democrat mayor in Chicago and a Democrat governor. There's a Democrat mayor in Baltimore and a Democrat mayor in the state of Maryland. So it's a way to stick it to them, especially because what's the guy Moore in Maryland? What's his first? Wes Moore in Maryland and Pritzker
Future candidates
are talking about running for president. It may also be that, unlike this is a supposition on my part. I don't know. What I do know is that there is some history in some of these Democrat cities of prosecutors not taking crime seriously. Maybe in Dallas, crime is bad, but there's no evidence that the city is looking the other way or trying to excuse it with radical DAs, or in the case of Chicago, a mayor who seems, if there was a hole in the ground and here's his rear end, I'm not sure he could tell the difference between the two.
Trump's authority would rely upon a finding that courts could accept of some kind of emergency, unquote.
Yeah.
And I think in most of these cases, it would be a stretch.
Well, it would
to
be
call
interesting
it
because I
emergency.
don't. I'm trying to think of ways to shift topics. I think we've talked about crime enough.
Well, the tragic hero thing, I'll just mention, one of the things you have to admit, though, I'll admit, is that, and I thought that in 2017, is that Trump, this is the age of Trump to a certain degree. You bookended the two
my
parts,
heroic
those
thesis.
12 years, is that people are reacting. Even a perfect example is the Epstein case, Jeffrey Epstein, which I think is an irrelevant case. I'm not remotely interested in the case. But if that's all you got to attack Trump, then you might as well include Clinton, Woody Allen, Bill Gates, and everybody else in this equation, because Trump's involvement was probably far less than Bill Clinton's. But who knows?
Clearly was.
Who clearly was. But the point
Trump
is,
never flew on the plane.
Exactly. If your only argument is you're looking for an old case, dubious connections with Trump.
That did seem to be an act of desperation.
Yeah, but they still think it has traction.
For about, 72 hours.
Maybe.
It looked like it might have been something that they could
Because
hurt
they thought
Trump
his
with,
voters.
and then it faded.
They thought
like
his-
Sidney Sweeney put an ad out in some of the Epstein.
They thought his base would desert him on that,
Yeah.
and they didn't.
And they didn't.
Yeah.
Well, that's just because they're having, it's like Russian collusion. They're having so much trouble coming
Pinning
up with
something
something
like that,
that sticks. There are days when I think
How about a
Trump,
policy? How about if they come up with a policy that actually they want to stick to?
Trump might be the
you know,
most,
but-
yeah, Trump might be the most law-abiding person in the world, considering how many people are trying to bring him down by finding something. One final note on the crime thing. Alvin Bragg in New York, prosecutor, announced at one point that he was going to he wasn't going to prosecute any armed robbery if somebody was actually not hurt.
Yeah.
Now, the backlash from the police ultimately forced him to back down, because this is a very dangerous thing for police when you can't arrest somebody and prosecute them when they threaten a cop with a weapon. That kind of policy might create a crisis which would justify an intervention, but it would be a judgment call and the courts would have to go for it.
Well, I was gonna, the segue I was going to make, you were talking about, could he announce an emergency in, say, in Baltimore and Chicago? He tried that with tariffs.
Yeah.
It didn't work, so federal court struck down, of course, and they're going to appeal, right? The Trump administration's going to appeal the tariffs. So there's one example of a law, so it's not clear what our tariff policy is going to be going into the future. And I suspect at some point there's going to be a Supreme Court case on this. And we saw this. It's one that it's a real problem. Maybe I should have made this an actual subject for us to talk about. The impotence of the United States Congress vis-a-vis Trump, which led by Republicans, so I'm indicting them as well as, I guess, Democrats who have less power to use in that case is just the tendency, even over the last two administrations, going back to Obama, right? There's an emergency with the so-called DACA, the Dreamers, right? And Congress is enacting, therefore I gain power and I can rewrite without any legislation the immigration status of millions of people. Biden, he declared it was a COVID emergency that gave him the power to erase tens, if not was it in the hundreds of billions of student loans, as well as rewrite eviction law, right? You can't evict anybody. And for Trump, right, he's saying there's an emergency. So I have to be able to set tax law by myself, which is what tariffs are. It's tax law.
Yeah.
Without any Congress, it's an emergency. So I can set taxes on my own without any congressional input. And so the acquiescence, this is something, maybe we've talked about this before, I can't remember. It's something that maybe James Madison never anticipated, which is that he assumes that checks and balances will work because each branch will be jealous of its own power. What if there's a branch that's more than happy to give away its power because it frees them of responsibility? So we can just go around and have a good time and be ridiculous, and the actual governing is done by these people. And so Congress has largely, to a large extent, has ceded its power to the executive and has acquiesced to government by executive order. Already, even within the first handful of weeks, Trump had just dwarfed the amount of executive orders of previous administrations. I have no idea what it is now. It's beyond belief.
So what exactly is the, I know it's been talked about since that, what's the actual legal standing of an executive order? So Trump, for example, let's just say
law.
It's not law. That's so the decision to talking about birthright citizenship, for example.
Yeah.
You can issue 30 executive orders on the issue, but it has
controls,
no power, though, right? In actual fact.
It has power over the executive branch, meaning that if the president issues an executive order to the State Department to follow a certain procedure, then the State Department is obligated to follow that procedure.
Doesn't the State Department also have to follow laws as well?
Because
can they basically deny? Can they just sort of ignore the laws and go along with whatever the president says on this issue?
Well, they can do whatever they can get away with. But if
Like
they,
the Justice Department, can they just ignore the federal law and say because the executive orders, because they're the executive branch?
certainly from time to time, they pretty much do that. And the immigration policy of the Biden administration for 4 years is a pretty good example of a large part of the federal government simply ignoring law.
But ignoring the law is not the same as
You
breaking
know,
the law.
I think
Oh,
that's
I
slightly different.
disagree.
It's slightly different because what you're talking about is the Biden administration's refusal to enforce immigration law, not unlike the Trump administration's refusal to actually execute the TikTok ban, right? So they're just ignoring
Yeah.
the law. That's different from an executive order, which is directing, that's not doing something. Executive order is directing people to do things. And while maybe it violates the law, no administration would put it that way.
Yeah.
And what they would say is, this is my interpretation of the law, and that's why it's legal. So my interpretation of birthright, well, I guess it'd be the 14th Amendment,
Yeah.
is this. Therefore, these people who everyone thought had legal status were citizens are no longer citizens, right? And I'm directing my State Department or Justice Department, whoever the relevant bureaucracy is.
How many of these executive orders over time have ever gone to the Supreme Court to be?
Oof.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a lot, but the thing is, you know, it's one of the difficulties of the Trump administration. It seems like there's one every other week because you know,
yeah.
we've now gotten into this cycle. Starting week one, is Trump issues some executive orders, someone files suit, they judge shop, they can find one federal judge somewhere to say no, and though there's a Supreme Court ruling about national stays, whether a district court can do a stay for the entire country and only under limited circumstances can they do that, or they can't in the circumstances of relevant. I won't go into relevant to the particular case, but then there are other circumstances that the court didn't look into. But you say that it's an executive order isn't law because it's just directive towards. It's telling the bureaucracy our interpretation of the law is this, and we want you to act accordingly to that. But this is one of the blessings, and really I think more so the curse, is that, you know, like one of the first things that the Biden administration did, like first day, is they undid every single executive order of the Trump administration. Now they then went back and they redid some of them because not all of them were bad, and some, of course, were perfunctory about minor things, right? But that we immigration status. If you wanted to do it by executive law, you can revoke it by executive order. You can revoke it by executive order. So if the next president is President Gavin Newsom, he can just. So it lacks that permanent status.
And that's a limitation for the use of that power, I would agree, and there should be a limitation. But we don't want presidents to be able to make permanent law without Congress.
When did executive actions, were they first initiated under?
George Washington.
That long? Okay.
Yeah. Though you don't really see a heavy use of executive action until Teddy Roosevelt because, and so much of it had to do with land policy, right? It was Teddy Roosevelt saying, you're a national park, or what do you...
Forgot about that,
I'm trying to think of the designation. It's like you can declare something a monument. He might not be able to declare something. I'm trying to think if the president can declare something a national park. He certainly can declare monuments.
Yeah.
So you're a monument, you're a monument, you're a monument.
Exactly.
And it was him, the conservation policy of, I can take all sorts of land and take it out of production, so to speak, and put it into conservation by simply declaring it a monument or some kind of federal designation.
And Trump could just reverse these types of orders, obviously, for parks
You could.
and for monuments, if you
Well,
wish.
look at, the example is, how it was Mount McKinley, then it was Mount Denali.
Okay.
Now, I guess it's Mount McKinley again.
Okay.
Or it's not the Gulf of Mexico, it's the Gulf of America.
Yeah,
Right?
for all this constitutional finery, I'm dubious of your distinction between breaking the law and ignoring the law. especially in the case of immigration, because it's fairly clear that the Biden administration did not just stop enforcing border. They facilitated the transition of people into the United States illegally. And the bigger backdrop was this, I mean, despite the acceleration of immigration, this has been going on obviously for a long time. And there was this sort of attitude that was like crime. You can't eliminate crime. You can't eliminate illegal immigration. And Trump just goes in and says, no, lock the door. And sure enough, we get control of the southern border. That ability to say, well, I'm just going to do something. And in this case, all he had to do was enforce federal law. So he's doing that same problem.
And I'm not disputing that something has happened, but I just have tried to look for the numbers in terms of illegal immigration for unbiased sources on this issue, and I can't find out what they are.
Well, where do you go? You've done stuff on immigration. Where do you get numbers?
I get numbers from all kinds of places. Some of the studies from both conservative and liberal think tanks, but the Washington Post has these numbers. They're there.
Well, aren't there? The federal government keeps track of what do they call it? Like, it's not border incidences.
Yeah, arrests.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's not even arrests. It's like contacts.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've fallen almost to zero. I mean, we really are looking at a radical transformation. They're estimating now that 1.5 million undocumented workers are no longer in the United States that were here when Trump took office.
In fact, did you see this stat today? 2025 might be the first year in American history that there's population decline.
Yeah.
Because so many immigrants, undoubtedly here illegally, are going back. And because we don't have enough legal immigration and we don't have enough babies, it's enough. And of course, people die. It's right. The math adds up that we might actually lose population.
But what I don't get about the policies, and I'm not, I'm trying to sort of legal. You're right. The legal, illegal. There's been a big decline in international students across the board and so forth. But is the end point, like the end point of the immigration policies? Like if the end point is we want to keep our country whiter, I'm all behind it. That's fine. I'm fine. But articulate it. We want a less diverse country. I'm okay with that.
To be clear, you're not in favor of we want to make the country whiter, but if that's your policy,
yes,
say it.
Say
that's
it.
What he means.
Although I'll let you people debate it themselves out in our audience,
Yes.
whatever. But I'm simply saying that. But
I'm really sorry you saved him.
No, I don't care. Right at this point, I don't care, people. At this point, I don't care. But nonetheless, but I need to know. I need to know what the end point is.
Yeah.
Like controlling. It's like
that
like I understand what controlling crime would be to make the country safer. I'm 100% for it.
I agree.
But with immigration, what is the end point of restricting immigration?
And it seems to me
neither side has articulated. Like the Democrats haven't really said why we want to. Like there's not a.
Well, I don't think they have a policy.
They don't have a policy. It's been a non-policy.
The Republicans or Trump.
But
roughly the same thing.
But what's his motive?
Sort of have a policy.
But what's the motive? Like, what's the end goal of reducing immigration? Because you just said we're losing.
The answer is to get first and foremost to get control of the border, because that's something people really want and something in a republic they deserve. To control the number of people and the kinds of people coming across the border. Then the question is, what do you use that control for? I've been pro-immigration all my life. I think we have better restaurants in Aberdeen because of immigration. We have a better culture. And as John alluded to, we need workers. But what you would like is some kind of rational relationship between the needs of the economy for immigrants and the number we let in. And that's the thing that we cannot possibly have gotten before. Now that if it's true that the border is effectively closed, the southern border, which seems to be that it might, the fact that nobody's talking about it almost is the strongest evidence that that's what's going on. Then the question is, can Congress, and it's Congress's responsibility to pass immigration reform. Now they can go to the Democrats. Trump can go to the Democrats and say, okay, you want more immigrants to come in from South America, fine. We're going to estimate how many we need. We're going to streamline the ability for valued workers to come here and get legal status. We're going to try and keep out. We're actually going to vet the M13 or what those various criminal gangs and try and keep those guys out.
But part of the problem for the Democrats has always been that, you know, it's going to, and it's not going to change, is that they cast immigration as a civil rights issue, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to get them to change on that. They believe that immigration fits into the category of people who are fleeing to the United States for rights, and whether it's true or not is irrelevant, because they're not going to shift from that policy.
In that case, they're going to continue seeing the erosion that
They will.
seen.
They probably will.
One of the things that we didn't put on our list is this rather astonishing piece in the New York Times describing a dramatic shift in voter registration toward Republicans over the 4 years of the Biden administration policy. Now, I've argued in noon forums and other places on campus that immigration is the primary issue that put Trump back in the White House, and that I suspect a lot of it is behind this. Again, when Biden took office, the American, according to every poll, support for immigration was about the highest it had ever been.
Can I say one thing, though?
Just finish my sentence, and declined precipitously thereafter. If you want people to be pro-immigration, you have to convince them that you're going to enforce the immigration laws. Go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say is a terrible analogy, but since I teach the course so much, I have to make the analogy is, you know, when you look at sort of early histories, people will say that the reason that the Germans voted for the Nazis is because of anti-Semitism. They didn't like the dilution of their culture and other issues. That's completely incorrect. It wasn't because of that. When you get into the weeds of this stuff, it was only about the economy. They faced 40% unemployment. Hitler went from 2% in 1929 to 33% in 1932. And suddenly they didn't have an explosion of racism. I don't think...
What was the inflation rate in, say, 1932?
Exactly.
Makes our inflation look like...
My thing is, like, I don't think Biden lost. I don't think Democrats were wiped out so much. Immigration on most of these people's, you know, exit polls fell pretty far low on the list. It was the mismanagement, the perceived mismanagement of the economy. I mean, I think if the inflation wasn't an issue, although it was, and all these other things, I think Biden still would have done poorly. But I think immigration isn't a crime. I think is more of an issue. But I think immigration, it motivates some people on both sides. But I think most Americans are indifferent to the issue.
I'm looking at the clock on my wrist, and I think it's time to wrap up. So, but we should have talked about this beforehand, because we've been ending every show with a movie recommendation. So, do you have one?
You guys first.
Because I've got one.
You guys go first.
I've got one. I can recommend. So a few weeks ago. So the problem is going to be it's not in theaters and it's too recent for it to be streaming. Probably is the movie Eddington. Did I email you about this? I did.
You liked it. You hated another movie, but you did. Yeah.
I hated Superman. Oh, that's right. I hated Superman, which is just beyond god awful. That doesn't begin to describe how bad Superman is. But Eddington, which is this film with Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal, and Emma Stone is in it. And so what it does is it's set in New Mexico in the summer of 2020, and they basically take all the craziness of 2020 to, say, 2022, if that wasn't too weird of a way of putting it, of the COVID era, let's put it that way, and cram it into 2 weeks in this little New Mexico town. And it's outstanding acting. It's an outstanding script. It will take you back to the era of COVID in a way that is so vivid you might have PTSD while watching. But then it also becomes about the George Floyd incident and about defund the police and violence and Antifa. Like I say, so in that sense, it's a bit of a mythos because all this happens in this small town in a very concentrated period of time. I'll say, as sort of a movie in 3 acts, the last act is incredibly violent. Like, Inglourious Bastards, Quentin Tarantino level violence that goes on for about 15 minutes. And it's difficult to watch. If you do not like violence on screen, or if you've got a weak stomach for it, it might not be a movie for you. But it is one of the most thought-provoking films I've ever seen. And I think it's a wonderful film, though. I think it's too violent. It's more violent than it needs to be in the last act, and it a little bit comes from out of nowhere. But I can still recommend Eddington. As a very good film. So
I do have something a little unusual for what I usually recommend, and that's a documentary. It's called Cave of Bones. Several decades ago, an anthropologist in South Africa hired some cavers to go out and look for fossils. And boy, did they ever found them. They found a new species, which is now called Homo naledi, for the region, I guess, where Rising Star Cave is the place. But this cave is, they give you a cross hatch of it at one point of how far you had to get into it. And these were folks that, the Homo naledi were about 3 feet tall. They had heads about the size of Cabbage Patch Dolls, brains a little bigger than chimpanzees, big feet, remarkably.
So they're hobbits.
They're basically, although that name had been stolen by the South Sea Island thing, but that's never mind that. The obvious question was how these bones got back there. They were deposited not one all together, but one at a time over time. What were they going back there for? Mm-hmm. And the obvious prospect was that these folks were burying their dead. I mean, for a creature that's this far from Homo sapien, the notion of burying your dead in a ritualistic fashion at a lot of trouble is a really provocative idea, but there wasn't a lot to support it yet. Now, in another chamber in the cave, they have found little pits with bodies in them. There's virtually no doubt anymore that these creatures were burying their dead. And so, if you've got claustrophobia, you might want to skip this one because there's a lot of going through these passages. And a lot of the cavers are women because they're slim enough to fit through these gaps. But talk about a fascinating look at a species that lived and died, and up till now we've had no idea they ever existed.
That's pretty,
It's fantastic. Cave of Bones.
Where did you see that on? Is it on some streaming service?
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix. Is where I saw it.
Okay. All right, so people can look for that.
I'll give before I get to the film, I'll give a questionable recommendation. In Vietnam, at this area near Saigon last summer, that we saw it with the Chu Chi tunnels, where the Viet Cong were digging these tunnels to go behind American lines during the Tet Offensive. They had this place where they showed a 45-minute North Vietnamese documentary about the American bombing campaign again. So that was an interesting take. Most people left early on. I stuck it through. But when you mentioned the weight thing, I was interested because I was wondering about the tunnels. And the man was telling me that the more and more tourists that we have from the West, we've made these tunnels wider and wider so they can actually fit into the tunnel. So they're twice the size of when the Viet Cong were actually slipping into these tunnels.
Can you imagine being a Viet Cong soldier going,
what's going on?
Why couldn't they have done this when I was there?
But the movie, I'm doing a Second World War class now, and we watched The Best Years of Our Lives recently.
Oh, what a great film.
With Frederick March, Dana Andrew, Myrna Loy, and I do not remember the actor whose hands were
Harold Russell.
Harold Russell.
Is that guy.
William Wyler. And there's something about that film which, while it's touching on everything, which is different class backgrounds of Americans, the banker, the working class Dana Andrews, the more middle class, coming. But the thing that I think is undeniable, I was telling the students, because you compare it to some Russian films I was showing, which are overwhelmingly despairing. This really was the beginning this was the best time in American history in terms of statistical sides. We've been living off the steam of that generation for decades.
That's the only way to
They
put
really
it, yes.
did build this industrial, and they're coming back in Can you imagine a better time to live in the United States in your 20s, with possibly in 1946?
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
Assuming you had survived.
Assuming you survived.
It's a fantastic movie.
Yeah,
It's epic, phenomenal. It's hard to say anything bad about it. And it's interesting that it was one of those movies, one of the rare movies about the Second World War that wasn't triumphant in the sort of straightforward way. It does, I think, you get indications that everybody in this is going to be okay. Everybody's going to have a decent life.
Yeah.
And things are just only going to get, but right at that moment, there's this great cartoon by of this guy, and he's being yelled at by his sarge, who's this kid with flaky red hair, right? And then he goes back home, and he's in a college classroom trying to get to get a job under the VA bill, and the same kid is up there yelling at him. And there was a tough period when people came back.
But you look at this for Northern State University. When you look at the Bartus's history, this was the heyday of Northern State.
Yeah.
These are all these waves of veterans coming from the 40s to the 60s. And then in the 60s, it had a little bit of resurgence against the Vietnam. But since from 40s to May 75,
my dad
the
got
best
his,
time in the world.
My dad got his pharmacy degree on the GI Bill.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool stuff.
I think it's just sad. I can't remember what I had for breakfast today, but I can remember that the guy who has literally hooks for hands and Best Years of Our Lives is Harold Russell, who actually lost his hands. It's a
in the
real
Second
guy,
World War,
a veteran. Who this is the only acting this guy ever did.
Oh, did? Okay.
Is this movie, and this naval, this seaman who had lost his hands in the Second World War and is hired to do this one movie, and he's great.
When he meets
in
his
this
fiancée, he's afraid to leave the taxi cab, and nobody cannot be moved by that scene. With the way she reacts to him and everything.
It is interesting in that I could talk about Best Years of Our Lives for a long time, as you can tell, but it might be the best movie about World War II. Yeah. And there's no combat in it because it's right as the war is over. It's these guys going home from the war. It's on the home front, and it's not a combat movie.
How about the airplane, the graveyard of airplanes?
Yes, that right at the end, with Dan Andrews.
There's just so many. I hadn't seen it until Carolyn said, "You've got to watch this movie." And so we did, and boy, was I glad. But
highly recommend Best Years of Our Lives. So we've got Best Years of Our Lives in the Cave. What is it?
Cave of Bones.
Cave of Bones in Eddington, which may not be available anywhere right now. Like I say, because it came out in July, I think. So it might be too soon for it to be on streaming, but it's also probably not showing in theaters.
We're rushing, but I want to ask, has anybody seen that? Is it Netflix, this film called Sinners, which is out there?
No, I'd like to. It's the vampire movie.
That's what I wanted to get. I'll wait till the next time.
We'll talk about it next time. Yeah. We have a Nosferatu thing we could talk about. We watched Nosferatu together.
Oh, okay.
We did.
He liked it a lot. I liked it a little. So
I liked it a lot.
Anyway, maybe we could, Liz, let's talk about Nosferatu next time.
Is it October coming up? Halloween movies.
Exactly. It could be a Halloween.
We do need to do schedule that.
But we could talk about scary movies. Anyway. Those are our recommendations, and so hopefully before Halloween we'll have another Spotlight, but certainly until then, my name's John Schaff, and join us next time for Spotlight.